Good morning. It says a lot out there. I'm not so sure how much of that, right? But I'm really, really humbled against this audience. Most of you are extremely learned, far more learned than I do. So I'm going to sort of put this in requisition mode. It's my request from my experience as to what I experience every day. And this presentation is going to be about looking at scaling the learning process, where I'm going to talk to you about how technology can make this happen, right? And there's going to be two parts to the presentation. The first part, I'm going to primarily talk about what we are seeing around us and how it impacts us and how it will impact, very importantly, our next generation. I am 40 plus, so I'm done, over, right? I'm moving on to the next generation. There is my kid and children that you all educate today and what happens to them and what we are going to do with them, right? That's sort of what we're going to look at, and how what we do is going to impact them. This is Klaus Schwab, who basically talked about, you must have heard the word disruption quite a bit, but the reality of what we have to see in front of us is not disruption, it's actually a revolution, what's happening in front of us, because what we have in front of us is an amazing challenge. That means the velocity of change that we see of things happening around us is much higher. Or the other way to put it, for people who are very science adept, is that we are actually seeing a delta acceleration that's happening, right? So what used to take 10 years to do now takes 5 years to do, now takes 2.5 years to do, now takes 1.5 years to do, so on and so forth, right? The average age of a company on the S&P 500 is now dropped to 7 years. That means a company that's suddenly like this really big company vanishes. We are in 2017, correct? If in 2005, I had told everybody in this room, Nokia will cease to exist, what would be your reaction? In 2005. Nokia, if I had asked for a raise of hands, in 2005, how many of you had a Nokia phone? 80%? Yeah, that's about right. How many of you have a Nokia phone today? Why not? That's the problem. And remember, this is a giant. And the same thing you would see with BlackBerry in the US, right? The most famous management stories around Kodak and so on, and Kodak is an old story. I'm not even going to go there, right? But you will see that across several industries, several business patterns, like taxi booking service. There were enough taxi booking services in every city. They all had online portals. They all had call centers. Now we do Ola, Uber. Right? We almost practically, how many of you can actually name anything other than Meru successfully? Right? There are about 7 or 8 in Bangalore. Right? We have gone past those days, right? If you look at the velocity change disruption that happened, it's actually much higher. That means we are actually a revolutionary state. That means we are constantly making changes so fast that it's impacting us. If that's our delta velocity change, what do you think will happen 15 years from today? Right? Instant gratification continuously. All right. So one of the things that I keep getting asked in a lot of places is all this automation, artificial intelligence, things that we are building out there is going to make our labor force, is it going to make humanity difficult, are we all going to be out of a job, etc., etc. But I can tell you that's not going to happen, my belief. Right? Is AI dangerous, etc., etc.? I'm not so sure. But I can tell you the human ingenuity is superb. Right? And we'll get past it. To the best of my knowledge, and my knowledge is like A small. For the last 6,000 years, we have had modernization. 6,000 years. When somebody brought the wheel, it disrupted somebody's job. When we discovered fire, it disrupted somebody's job. It happened. Right? We never read about it because nobody wrote that in a history book. Right? And these are two professions I ask about. We all remember stenographers. Practically everybody in this room, when you get to your class 10, we did typing class. Where are they? Right? A, S, D, F, G, F, semicolon, L, K, J, J, blah, blah, blah. We all did that, right? Gone. This profession is gone. We didn't grieve it much. I don't remember anybody coming in saying, you know what, stenographers went away. Right? Those are lift operators, elevator operators. Even today, you go to any building in the world, inside an elevator, there is a license that says this elevator license has been issued to this individual/organization for them to operate. It's a license, very similar to your motor vehicle driving license. Elevators have a license that you need to operate. You cannot just install it. Not very different from an autonomous car, right? If you think about, step back and think about it. Right? Except that that is a practice that's been established, it's operating, and the license has been issued, except that instead of being issued to an individual, it is being issued to a company now. Right? All those people lost their jobs. I don't see a lot of people grieving about that. Right? But these we didn't grieve. When did we start grieving? Is when this happened. When we took first white collar professions, where we had to do trading. This is your top line, right? Management grads who actually went into financial institutions and started making top line dollar, and they were told, you know what, a computer can do better trading than you at high velocity. And we were like, oops, what happened there? Right? That was one of the earliest. Robotic warehousing, where we fundamentally shifted the mechanics of how a warehouse operates, the intelligence required, the supply chain requirements, the logistics requirements. When that happened, we fundamentally said, oh my God, what's happening here? The entire subject of how to optimize a warehouse as an OR function became completely super automated. Where we need hundreds of thousands became something else. Not that we lost our jobs. What happened? We just did better jobs. Right? Instead of walking 10 kilometers a day inside a warehouse to pick items, there are a few people who do that, and there are other people who are doing better functions today. Right? Trying to serve this very same item that needs to reach your house. That's about it. More interesting work of AI, skin cancer detection or other forms of cancer detection. You must have heard of it from any number of companies in the world. When computers start detecting cancer, the question that there are a lot of, remember, it's a very, very hard topic. Huh? It is one of those sciences where we cannot have false positives and false negatives from software. We as humans have the amazing ability to pardon another human being. If a doctor gives us a poor diagnosis, we understand. If somebody gives us a poor recommendation, we understand. We cannot understand. We cannot believe. We will not excuse a piece of software giving us poor recommendation. That's not allowed. Correct? So, but that's happening. The fun happened actually much more interestingly. The reason why we see a lot of noise today is when these guys who were coding all of this lost their functions. What happened next was that the entire IT automation process, right? When the very guys who actually used to build software, manage software, automate software, etc., suddenly had automation come and tell them, we are going to take your role. Right? This is what got really interesting. So what happens in developer automation is a very interesting construct, right? So the person who used to do testing, that means if I wrote about 6 million lines of code and did software testing, and that required 100 software testers, and now it requires only 10 people because the other 5,850 people is just robotic automation tests. Somebody who did release, there were whole swarms of release engineering teams in companies. They became small deltas because you have continuous integration and continuous deployment. So the underlying professions that we saw in software that were actually job codes in many, many companies started vanishing. That means these people are now expected to do something better than what they were doing before. What they were doing was testing. What they were doing was release engineering. What they were doing was managing infrastructure. What does managing infrastructure means? Wait for a problem to occur. Until then, you are just sitting there. And when a problem occurs, I'm going to go fix it. Should you be sitting there? When we talk of the word like DevOps, what are we saying? The developer who built the product will actually manage the product also. You don't need to be independently sitting there. When we make those kinds of changes, the very underlying profession of technology got disrupted heavily. So that's the reason you see the noise level amplifying. Right? Oh my God, what's happening here? Nothing. It's just that we have to do better jobs at what we do. We have to apply our ingenuity into it. Right? So this, incidentally, recently I saw a video, so I thought I'll relate it back. The reason I have a dosa in here is basically Dr. Raghuram Rajan, who was the ex-RBI governor, in one of the interesting questions on dosanomics was actually asked, why is the price of dosa constantly going up irrespective of the inflation, deflation that's occurring in the economy. And he explained it through a construct called the Balassa-Samuelson effect. He said if the profession, if the output product, right, does not have an impact through productivity improvement, through technology, then the cost of the product is a function of the human resource and not the underlying product's requirements and resources. So what he explained was that when you try to make a dosa, what's happening behind the scenes is this interesting problem that the wage of that person who's making the dosa, because the underlying technology of making the dosa between the batter to the way you do the dosa to how you bring it out has been the same for like what? 1,000 years? You still have the same cast iron, you still, instead of gas, we have firewood behind. The technological improvements have not moved, right? We are more or less in the same plane, except for the grinder that came in. There was the massive automation that we did, right? Instead of that stone thing, we went to grinder, really. The rest of the dosa is exactly the same. So that means it's a function. This product is a function of the human resource behind it. What will happen to the product if you remove the human resource and put some intelligence behind it? The price will drop like nothing, which is what you see in fast food restaurants, which is what you see in mechanized production, right? So he explained it. So when a particular industry is touched by technology, something very interesting starts happening. It doesn't match the standard inflation anymore. It actually matches the market and actually comes down because the productivity of the individual behind it goes up superbly heavily because we just do a lot more as us. Right? And this is the largest difference between a developing economy versus a developed economy, right? The productivity components are substantially high. It's not that we don't put the same amount of hours. We do put it. Actually, Indians work a lot more if I'm not mistaken. Right? But it's just that our productivity efficiency is not where it needs to be because of how we operate as individuals. Now, so what that translates to is that as educators, as people in the education stream, when we try to build our next platform, what is it that we have? What is it that's in need? And how is it that we are going to get that more interesting? That's the real question. Now, I work at Amazon, so I'm going to talk about Amazon primarily here. But the underlying principles operate this. Now, what happens is, when we talk about this term called cloud technology, right? It's what's a very simple principle. What is cloud? It is about taking fundamentally what you would call capital expenditure and converting it to match your operational consumption. Right? So let's think about this. In your institutions, if I guarantee to you, you will get electricity no matter what. And if you're actually one of those institutions in Mumbai today, even in India, you probably don't have a generator. But if you're an institution in Bangalore or Chennai or whatever, you have a generator running. Correct? Because the underlying infrastructure to supply electricity to you is not there. But in Mumbai, current just comes. I mean, you are there. I have never seen a power. I lived there for 5 years. I didn't see a power cut. And now, no homes come with generator, by the way. 22-story buildings don't come with generator in Mumbai. They don't need one because there's power supply. Right? So that's the situation. Anybody here from Mumbai? None. Okay. That's the truth. Huh? You may look like fiction. It's not. Not in India also. That's the amazing part. That place doesn't have a power failure. Now, what happens in the cloud is we basically look at that underlying problem and we say, okay, what happens if I do this for compute to you? You want access to a computer, it's available. When you don't need it, it is not there for you. And there's no cost for it. Now, when you look at it that way, there is no capital expenditure. There is your operational cost is a function of your utilization. Right? And the kind of data you have access to, the kind of capability you have access to fundamentally changes with it, with very different economics. Remember, going and saying, I will go buy a server somewhere, buy it, keep it, put it through a leasing program and spend it over 4 years is not the same thing. The simplest difference to mental model it, buying a car versus riding an Uber. You do the math and tell me that an Uber is more expensive than car, it will never happen. It will never happen. Your average running time in a day, probably 25, 30 kilometers or 50 kilometers. You take an Uber every day, you will never match the cost of a car. Even if Uber doubles the price. Right? Why? Because it's a function of consumption, it's not a function of investment. You need simple math you can work on a paper. That's exactly what cloud is about. It's about, if it's about your consumption, why do you need to have that dead investment sitting in your, why are you running the AC 24 hours when there's nobody in the lab? That's power supply cost, right? That's largely how it goes. So the waves of disruption over time has happened this way. And this is one very, very important point I want to leave you with, and then the last 4 slides are like very, very quick. But when we started early on in our careers, we had what we call individual disruption. Personal computers came in and we had individual disruption. People who had access to technology improved and learned faster than people who did not have access to it. That is all. This is what we used to call digital divide, right, at a personal level. Then it happened to teams, people who collaborated with each other at small scale. Then it happened to organizations. So organizations that had ERP software, organizations that had CRM software, scaled better and they enveloped the globe. When you look at globalization, if you look at globalization, what was it? It was fundamentally about companies that could take templated technology and apply it throughout the globe really, really fast. So if you talk to anybody who has done an SAP deployment, they'll say, we did a template deployment in India, we did a template deployment in Australia, we did a template deployment in XYZ. Why are they saying that? Because they built a set of business processes and said, this business process I'm going to go cut, paste, cut, paste, cut, paste everywhere. Right? And they disrupted and cleaned up industries and many, many companies and large organizations, whichever markets they entered. But then there came the next level of changes, right? Which is companies like Amazon, Uber, Airbnb. What these did, they did not just disrupt other companies, they disrupted the entire industry model. They disrupted the entire industry model. Now here is my question. What is the next level of disruption you will have in the next 10 years? What if I told you it is society? That your construct of society as it exists today may not exist. What if I told you the cohort of people that you think that live together can be across national borders, or what we call national borders? Do you need one? What happens if there is cryptocurrency in which you trade, right? And you have your Facebook friends as your friends. Now what happens at that point? Which country do you belong to? What is country? What is society? What is state? What is city? The geographical boundary, which is a physical reality existence, can be disrupted. It takes time. Nobody said industrial disruption would occur 15 years ago. I never heard that. Nobody heard globalization would occur 50 years ago. Can it happen? Is it possible? If I fundamentally today Bitcoin exists, right? Your cryptocurrencies exist. There are challenges, and remember, always regulation follows technology. Regulation follows implementation. It never comes the other way around. Right? Autonomous transport, artificial intelligence, augmentation, smart agents, all these are technologies that are fundamentally looking at changing the way we think as what our boundaries are. Now, in that era where we are trying to bring people in, we have to look at what is the kind of skills we need to put them into. What is the kind of capabilities we need to build them into, and what is it that we are going to get them ready for? What kind of change? That means they should be willing, those are the kind of people who will be willing to accept change really, really fast. Because our velocity absorption, remember, it's not about how fast technology is going, it's your ability to absorb it really fast. Right? It's never about, great, somebody's got great features. No, can you absorb that feature? There's a great Uber app. If you can't use it, not helpful. You are not taking advantage of technology. So we need to be able to create people who can absorb innovation, who can innovate for us, who can absorb that innovation for us. Now at Amazon, we fundamentally believe in this construct, and we basically say, as institutions, do you then therefore need the flexibility, the capability? If you buy a piece of hardware or a lab, and that lab is going to sit there for 5 years, and the technology behind it changes every 4 months, what's the point? Think about it. You bought a piece of lab, computer lab, let's say, hypothetically. It's got an AI machine. It's a 5-year lease agreement, 4-year lease agreement. The technology behind it changes every 3 months. What's your plan? Right? So, oh, by the way, the very construct of education is changing. Of course, you guys know that. So I didn't have to go through this. You probably are facing this upside down everywhere you go into. So our value proposition is this, right? So we have our technology, our capability, our mechanics that are available for you to use, available with credits that you can take advantage of. There is ready-made course content, lab, etc. But most importantly, our underlying cloud infrastructure. Remember, computing is not specific to computer science or only science. There are art students who can use it very, very well. Actually, most art subjects today need computer science. Right? Math is going to be the horizontal plane in which we are all going to operate. Right? So thousands of institutions globally, some big names out there, some Indian names, Gujarat Technical University, National University of Singapore, Carnegie Mellon University, Hong Kong University, so on and so forth. But thousands of institutions have joined this underlying program to get that knowledge, content, etc. propagated to the students below, because they have to be made ready to what it is. Right? Great quotes from others, I'm not going to get into it. Central to Amazon, our education system, our mechanics of collaboration in the system. It's a very simple thing. You just go to awseducate.com and sign up. Trivial, right? Like how you go shopping on Amazon. I'm sure all of you know that now. Anybody who doesn't know how to shop on Amazon here? One hand went up. Couple of hands went up. Please catch up with me. But that's largely how this works, right? And I will not be here. I have to run to Chennai right now, right after this. But Neha, my colleague, is right here. Neha, please. She is the champion of Educate in India. That's her email ID. Please do reach out to her. She'll be in the greatest of positions to help all of you get started. More importantly, help our children out there. Thank you.